What would you do if everything you built started crumbling at once? When Mike Anderson's life spirals into chaos, with a sick daughter, mounting medical bills, and the threat of losing both his home and job, he discovers an ancient philosophy that might just save his sanity. This isn't just another story about overcoming adversity. It's a powerful journey into finding strength in life's most uncertain moments. Stay tuned to discover how ancient wisdom can transform modern chaos into inner peace. The California sun cast long shadows through the classroom windows as Mike Anderson erased the last algebra equations from the whiteboard. The empty room echoed with the familiar squeak of the eraser, a sound that had been comforting for the past 12 years of teaching. But today, it felt different, heavier. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another medical bill notification. His daughter Emma's diabetes supplies were getting more expensive, and the insurance company was being increasingly difficult about coverage, the same insurance he might lose if the school board went through with their planned budget cuts. Mike slumped into his chair, running his fingers through his graying hair. At 35, he felt twice his age. The mortgage payment was due next week, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could make it. The housing market in San Diego had become ruthless, and refinancing seemed impossible with the current rates. The sound of footsteps in the hallway caught his attention. Through the classroom door's window, he saw Charles Martinez, the school's elderly janitor, making his evening rounds. There was something different about Charles, a calm dignity that seemed out of place in their chaotic world. Despite working 2 jobs and caring for his sick wife, the man always wore a subtle smile and carried himself with an inexplicable serenity. Mike gathered his things, ready to head home to Emma and his wife Sarah. As he stepped into the hallway, Charles looked up from his work. "Rough day, Mr. Anderson." Mike managed a weak smile. "Is it that obvious?" Charles leaned on his mop, studying Mike with kind eyes. "You know, there was a time when I thought uncertainty would break me. Then I found something that changed everything. A better job? Winning lottery numbers?" Mike attempted to joke. Charles shook his head, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a worn paperback, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Something much more valuable. Ever heard of the Stoics? Mike shook his head, but something in Charles's expression made him pause. Maybe it was desperation, maybe fate, but he found himself reaching for the book. "Take it," Charles said, pressing the book into Mike's hands. "It might help you, like it helped me." The drive home through San Diego's evening traffic gave Mike time to wrestle with his thoughts. The dashboard clock read 5:47 p.m. He was running late for Emma's insulin check. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as he waited at yet another red light, the borrowed book sitting heavily in his messenger bag. At home, he found Emma curled up on the couch with her homework, her glucose monitor beeping softly. Sarah was in the kitchen, surrounded by papers, medical bills, insurance forms, and their monthly budget spread across the counter like a paper battlefield. "Hey, honey." Sarah looked up, her tired eyes betraying her cheerful tone. The insurance company called again. They're denying the coverage for Emma's new insulin pump. Mike felt his chest tighten. The pump would cost thousands out of pocket, money they simply didn't have. He watched Emma through the kitchen doorway, her young face focused on her math homework, blissfully unaware of the financial storm brewing around her. That night, after Emma was asleep and Sarah had finally put away the last of the bills, Mike found himself sitting in their small backyard. The coastal breeze carried the faint salt smell of the Pacific, and overhead, planes descended towards San Diego International, their lights blinking steadily against the dark sky. He pulled out Charles's book, its pages dog-eared and marked with annotations. Opening to the first page, he read, "Accept the things to which fate binds you and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." Something in those words caught him, held him. He read them again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. Over the next few days, Mike found himself stealing moments to read between classes, during lunch breaks, and late at night. The ancient words of Marcus Aurelius began to seep into his consciousness, offering a different perspective on his struggles. During a particularly stressful parent-teacher conference, when an angry father was berating him about his son's grades, Mike remembered a passage. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. Instead of reacting defensively, he maintained his composure, turning the confrontation into a productive discussion about the student's needs. At home, Emma was having a difficult time adjusting to her condition. One evening, as he helped her with her glucose monitoring, she burst into tears. "Why did this have to happen to me, Dad? It's not fair." Mike paused, remembering Epictetus's words about focusing on what we can control. "You're right, sweetie. It's not fair," he said, pulling her close. "But you know what? We can't control that it happened, but we can control how we handle it. And you're handling it like a champion." Later that night, Sarah found him in their bedroom, surrounded by papers. But unlike before, there was a methodical calmness to his approach. "You seem different," she observed, sitting beside him on the bed. "Less scattered." Mike nodded, showing her a carefully crafted budget plan. "I've been reading this book," he explained. "It's teaching me to focus on what I can actually control. We can't control the insurance company or the school board, but we can control how we prepare and respond." Sarah picked up the worn copy of Meditations, curious about what had sparked this change in her husband. The following Monday brought the news Mike had been dreading. Principal Roberts called an emergency staff meeting after school. The district's budget cuts were worse than expected. They would need to eliminate several teaching positions by the end of the semester. As his colleagues erupted in panic and protests, Mike found himself strangely calm, recalling Seneca's words. "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Instead of joining the chorus of complaints, he began taking notes, analyzing his options. Walking back to his classroom, he overheard two younger teachers discussing their plans to leave teaching altogether. The tech industry in California was always hiring, they said. Better money, better benefits. For a moment, the idea tempted him. It could solve their financial problems. But something held him back. He found Charles cleaning nearby, quietly, observing the aftermath of the meeting. "You didn't seem surprised in there," Charles noted, leaning on his mop. "I've been preparing myself mentally," Mike replied. "Your book, it's changing how I see things." Charles smiled knowingly. "You know, Marcus Aurelius wasn't just writing philosophy. He was leading an empire during a plague and multiple wars. If he could handle that uncertainty..." Their conversation was interrupted by Mike's phone ringing. It was Sarah. His heart sank when he heard her voice. "Mike, Emma's in the hospital. Her blood sugar, it's really bad. They're saying something about ketoacidosis." The calm he'd cultivated threatened to shatter, but he held onto it fiercely. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. As he rushed to his car, he repeated to himself, "Focus on what you can control. Focus on what you can control." The pediatric wing of Scripps Mercy Hospital hummed with activity as Mike rushed through the sliding doors. He found Sarah in Emma's room, clutching their daughter's hand while a doctor explained the treatment plan. Emma lay pale against the white sheets, an IV dripping steadily beside her. "The good news is we caught it early," the doctor explained, "but we need to adjust her care plan. She'll need more frequent monitoring and a different insulin regimen." Mike listened intently, taking notes on his phone. Instead of letting panic overwhelm him, he focused on gathering information, something he could control. The doctor mentioned new technology that could help prevent future episodes, a continuous glucose monitoring system that would alert them before Emma's blood sugar reached dangerous levels. "Insurance might not cover it," the doctor added apologetically. Before, those words would have sent Mike spiraling. Now he remembered a passage from Epictetus. "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Later that night, while Emma slept and Sarah went home to rest, Mike sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, reading through medical pamphlets. His phone buzzed with an email from Principal Roberts. The list of teachers under review would be released tomorrow. Instead of anxiously checking his email every few minutes, he pulled out his notebook and began making lists. Things he could control, things he couldn't, and actions he could take regardless of outcomes. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he started researching medical grants, part-time tutoring opportunities, and diabetes support groups. When Emma stirred, he set aside his planning to hold her hand. "Dad," she whispered, "are you scared?" "Yes," he answered honestly, remembering the Stoic principle of truthfulness. But being scared doesn't mean we can't be brave. The next morning brought unexpected news. Principal Roberts' email contained not just the review list, but also an opportunity. The district was creating a pilot program for evening classes aimed at working adults. They needed teachers willing to take on additional hours. As Mike read the email in the hospital cafeteria, stirring his untouched coffee, Charles's words from their first conversation echoed in his mind. The obstacle is the way. The evening program would mean longer days and less time at home, but it could provide the extra income they desperately needed. Sarah arrived with fresh clothes and a troubled expression. The mortgage company called. "They're not willing to modify our loan." She sat heavily in the plastic chair across from him. "And Emma's medical social worker wants to meet with us this afternoon." Mike shared the news about the evening program. "It's not ideal, but it's something we can actually do," Sarah finished, showing she'd been paying attention to their recent conversations about Stoic principles. Later that day, during Emma's physical therapy session, Mike encountered Jason Chen, another parent, from the pediatric ward. Jason's son was battling leukemia, yet the man maintained a remarkable composure that reminded Mike of Charles. "I noticed you reading Marcus Aurelius," Jason said, nodding toward the book peeking out of Mike's bag. "Have you reached the part about the archer yet?" "Not yet," Mike replied. "An archer's excellence isn't just in hitting the target," Jason explained, "but in doing everything in their power to aim true, regardless of whether the wind blows the arrow off course." The conversation was interrupted by Mike's phone. The medical social worker was ready to meet. As he stood to leave, Jason handed him a business card. "I run a support group, not just for parents of sick kids, but for anyone trying to find their way through uncertainty." The meeting with the medical social worker revealed both challenges and possibilities. She introduced them to a clinical trial for a new diabetes management system, one that could significantly reduce Emma's medical expenses if she qualified. However, participation would require frequent hospital visits and careful documentation. "It's a 6-month commitment," the social worker explained, "and there's no guarantee she'll be selected." Mike thought of Epictetus's teaching about attachment to outcomes. "We'll apply," he decided. "The rest isn't up to us." That evening, Mike started the new evening classes. His students were different from his usual teenagers. Adults juggling jobs, families, and their own struggles to improve their lives. As he taught algebra to a room full of determined faces, he found himself sharing more than just mathematics. "Think of variables as the things we can't control," he explained, writing an equation on the board. "Our job isn't to eliminate them, but to work with them, to find solutions despite the unknowns." After class, a student named Maria stayed behind. She worked as a billing specialist at a medical center and had overheard Mike mentioning Emma's situation. "There are programs most people don't know about," she said, writing down some contacts, "and I know which insurance codes tend to get approved more often." Walking to his car under the California stars, Mike reflected on how support seemed to appear in unexpected places. His phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Emma's blood sugar was stable, and she'd managed to finish her homework, despite the day's medical tests. Another message followed, this one from Jason, reminding him about the support group meeting tomorrow evening. Mike hesitated, remembering Marcus Aurelius's words about the importance of community. "We were born to work together." The support group met in a community center near Balboa Park. Mike arrived early, finding Jason setting up chairs in a circle. The room filled gradually with people from different walks of life. Some he recognized from the hospital, others complete strangers, all carrying their own burdens of uncertainty. As people shared their stories, Mike noticed a pattern. Those who seemed to cope best weren't necessarily those with the fewest problems. but those who'd learned to accept what they couldn't change while actively working on what they could. Halfway through the meeting, his phone vibrated. Principal. Roberts wanted to see him first thing tomorrow morning. The same moment, a text from Sarah appeared. The insurance company had denied their appeal for Emma's new monitoring system. The double blow of news tested his newly developed equanimity. His hands trembled slightly as he put the phone away, trying to focus on the ongoing discussion. A woman across the circle was talking about losing her business of 20 years. "The hardest part," she said, "isn't the loss itself, but the story we tell ourselves about what the loss means." After the meeting, Jason pulled Mike aside. "I saw your reaction to those messages," he said. "Remember what Seneca taught us about fortune. No man has ever been so far advanced by fortune that she did not threaten him as greatly as she had previously indulged him." Driving home, Mike's mind raced with possibilities, both good and bad, about tomorrow's meeting. The uncertainty felt like a physical weight on his chest. But then he remembered something Charles had said: "Uncertainty isn't your enemy, it's your teacher." His grip on the steering wheel loosened slightly as he realized, whatever tomorrow brought, he was better equipped to handle it than he'd been just weeks ago. The morning meeting with Principal Roberts wasn't what Mike expected. Yes, teaching positions were being cut, but Roberts had been watching Mike's evening classes closely. The adult education program was succeeding, and they wanted to expand. "We need a program coordinator," Roberts explained. "Someone who understands both the academic and human elements." Your name came up. The position would mean more responsibility and better pay, but also more uncertainty. It was an entirely new role with no blueprint to follow. As Mike left the office, he remembered Marcus Aurelius's words about embracing challenges. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. At the hospital for Emma's weekly checkup, they ran into Maria, the billing specialist from his evening class. She'd been working on their case in her spare time. "I found 3 possible paths for coverage," she explained, spreading papers across the waiting room table. "And there's a non-profit that might help with the gap funding." Meanwhile, Emma had started her own blog about being a teenage diabetic, turning her experience into something constructive. She showed Mike her latest post during her treatment. "I used that thing you told me about control, Dad," she said proudly, "about focusing on what we can do instead of what we can't." Sarah, who had been quietly managing her own struggles, revealed she'd started freelance graphic design work in her spare time. "I figured if you could take on evening classes, I could do this," she said. "It's not much yet, but it's something we can build on," Mike finished, recognizing how the Stoic principles he'd been learning were naturally spreading through his family. That evening, Charles stopped by Mike's classroom. "How are you holding up with all the changes?" "Actually," Mike began, but was interrupted by an urgent call from Sarah. Emma had fainted during soccer practice and was being rushed to the emergency room. Her new blog post about staying active despite diabetes had inspired her to try out for the team, but perhaps they'd pushed too far, too fast. Racing to the hospital, Mike fought to maintain his composure. He recalled Epictetus's teaching: "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Still, the fear felt raw and real. In the ER waiting room, he found Sarah clutching Emma's glucose meter, tears in her eyes. "Her numbers were perfect this morning," she whispered. "We did everything right." The doctor's diagnosis was unexpected. Emma's incident wasn't directly diabetes-related. She was severely anemic, a condition that had gone unnoticed amid their focus on blood sugar levels. It was treatable, but it meant more medical expenses, more medications, more complexity. As they processed this news, Mike's phone lit up with an email from Principal Roberts. The school board needed his decision about the program coordinator position by tomorrow. The timing felt cruel, yet somehow appropriate. Life rarely waited for convenient moments to demand decisions. In the hospital cafeteria, Mike and Sarah sat with cooling cups of coffee, trying to make sense of their options. The coordinator position would provide better insurance, but the program's success wasn't guaranteed. Their current coverage was limited but familiar. "Sometimes," Sarah said, "I wonder if we're being tested." Mike thought of Marcus Aurelius's words, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." Just then, Jason appeared in the cafeteria doorway, concern etched on his face. He'd seen Emma's name on the ER admission list during his son's treatment. Jason joined Mike and Sarah, offering not just sympathy, but practical advice. He'd navigated complex medical systems for years with his son's leukemia. The key, he said, is to build a network. Doctors, nurses, insurance specialists, support groups, they're all pieces of the puzzle. As they talked, Mike realized that the Stoic principles he'd been studying weren't just about personal resilience. They were about building a resilient community. With renewed focus, Mike and Sarah began to make decisions. They'd take the program coordinator position. The risk was worth the potential benefits for Emma's care. Sarah would scale up her freelance work, creating a financial buffer. But the most significant decision came from Emma herself. From her hospital bed, pale but determined, she announced she wanted to turn her blog into a broader platform for kids with chronic illnesses. "If I can help even one person feel less alone," she said, "then all of this has a purpose." Mike recognized the echoes of Stoic thought in his daughter's words, finding meaning in adversity, focusing on what one can contribute rather than dwelling on personal misfortunes. As they prepared to take Emma home, Mike received a text from Charles. "Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate challenges, but to grow stronger through them." That evening, Mike sat down to draft his acceptance email for the coordinator position. As he typed, he found himself outlining not just a curriculum, but a philosophy for the program based on Stoic principles, resilience, community, and finding purpose in life's challenges. He paused, realizing that the past few months hadn't just been about surviving uncertainty. They'd been about learning to thrive in it. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes. Mike dove into his new role as program coordinator, while Sarah's freelance work began to gain traction. Emma's health stabilized, but the complexity of managing her conditions remained a daily challenge. As Mike implemented Stoic-inspired principles into the adult education program, he noticed a shift in the students' attitudes. They began to approach their studies with a newfound resilience, seeing obstacles as opportunities for growth. However, the school board grew concerned about the unconventional approach. During a tense meeting, one board member questioned the appropriateness of incorporating philosophy into a practical education program. "We're here to teach skills, not life lessons," the member argued. Mike found himself defending not just his program, but his entire worldview. He remembered Seneca's words, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." These aren't just life lessons, Mike countered. They're practical tools for navigating an uncertain world. Our students aren't just learning algebra. They're learning how to approach challenges in every aspect of their lives. The debate raged on, with the program's future hanging in the balance. Mike realized that everything he'd learned was being put to the test. Could he maintain his composure and clarity of thought under this pressure? Meanwhile, at home, Emma faced a crucial decision of her own. Her blog had caught the attention of a major diabetes advocacy group, which invited her to speak at a national conference. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant missing several days of school and disrupting her carefully managed health routine. As Mike left the heated board meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from Emma. "Dad, I'm scared about the conference. What if something goes wrong?" He found himself at a crossroads, both professionally and personally. How he responded to these challenges would define not just his future, but potentially the futures of his students and his daughter. The day of reckoning arrived with a dual intensity. Mike stood before the school board, prepared to make his final appeal for the adult education program, while across town, Emma was about to take the stage at the diabetes conference. As Mike began his presentation, he felt a sudden calm wash over him. He remembered Marcus Aurelius's words, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." "What we're offering isn't just education," Mike explained to the board. "It's a roadmap for resilience." He shared stories of students who had overcome incredible odds. A single mother who'd gained the confidence to start her own business, a recovering addict who'd found purpose in learning. These principles, Mike continued, aren't just ancient philosophy, they're practical tools for modern survival. As he spoke, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He knew it was news about Emma, but he resisted the urge to check it. Focus on what you can control, he reminded himself. The board members leaned in, clearly moved by the testimonials. Even the skeptical member from before seemed to be reconsidering. Just as Mike concluded his speech, the door burst open. It was Sarah, beaming, with tears in her eyes. "Emma did it," she announced to the stunned room. She spoke to over 1,000 people. She didn't just talk about diabetes, she talked about facing uncertainty with courage. The room erupted in applause, not just for Emma, but for the living, proof of the program's philosophy standing before them. In that moment, Mike realized that the true test hadn't been the board's decision or Emma's speech. It had been their collective journey through uncertainty, emerging stronger and more connected on the other side. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of that pivotal day spread far and wide. The school board not only approved Mike's program, but also allocated additional resources to expand it to other schools in the district. Emma's speech went viral, inspiring countless others facing chronic illnesses to find their voice and purpose. Mike found himself at the center of a growing community of resilience. Students from his program started mentoring each other, creating a network of support that extended beyond the classroom. Sarah's freelance work blossomed into a small design agency, specializing in accessibility-focused websites for health organizations. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Emma excitedly planning her next blog post, Sarah sketching ideas for a new client, and Mike reviewing applications for the expanding program, he realized how far they'd come. The challenges hadn't disappeared, but their approach to them had fundamentally changed. Charles, who had become a regular guest at their home, raised his glass in a toast. "To the Anderson family," he said, living proof that the obstacle is indeed the way. Mike thought back to that first day when Charles had handed him the worn copy of Meditations. He couldn't have imagined then how those ancient words would transform not just his life, but the lives of so many others. As they clinked glasses, Mike felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the absence of struggles, but for the strength and wisdom they had found in facing them together. The future remained uncertain, as it always would. But now, instead of fearing that uncertainty, they embraced it as an opportunity for growth, connection, and meaningful living. Mike smiled, remembering Marcus Aurelius's words that had become his family's unofficial motto: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Mike's journey shows us that Stoic philosophy isn't just some old theory, but a powerful tool for tackling modern challenges. And that wraps up another story packed with emotion and Stoic lessons. Don't miss out on our next videos. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, smash that like button, drop a comment, and share with your squad. Also, check out an awesome book recommendation in the video description and pinned comment.